Lights out.
Welcome everybody once again to the SleepTech Talk. Hey Robert, I got it right this time. The Sleep Podcast, and we appreciate y'all for joining us once again. And with your hosts, Robert Miller, Emerson Kerr, and the man who waits till midnight to brush his teeth, Jerry George. And we have a fantastic guest once again today for each and every one of you. And we thank you all for listening. But before I get into that, I'm going to hand it off to Emerson, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about today. Emerson.
Hey, absolutely. Thanks, Jerry. It's a pleasure to talk to everyone. I'm actually talking to you from the Pittsburgh International Airport. Thank God for technology and the fact that you don't know what's going on around me. But we're really fortunate today to have Kimi Clark with us. Kimi and I met, probably a little over 15 years ago at the old Southeast Southwest APT. And Kimi's been a part of education and accreditation and just a long, rich history bringing value to sleep technology. And we are excited to have her with us today. So Kimi, if you can, just go ahead and share a little bit about how you got into sleep, a little bit of your background, and we look forward to hearing about it. Thanks, Kimi.
Thank you. Well, it's funny because I have been listening to your podcast and everybody's kind of origin stories. It was like same. Everybody kind of just, especially our generation, I guess, it kind of happened by accident. You know, somebody says, hey, have you ever heard about the sleep lab? So that's kind of exactly what happened. My sister-in-law was in nursing school and she was working in a sleep lab, but kind of on the side. She was like, you should come work at the sleep lab. And, you know, of course, in my mind, I was thinking kind of what I heard a couple of you guys say is like, there's going to be a big glass panel and I'm just going to watch him through the glass and I'm going to be in this other room. And so when I got in there and saw it and there's actual bedrooms and you're in another room, you know, so it was just kind of by accident. I worked EMS prior to that, which actually is a side note. I think that's a pretty good crossover when you've got, because I worked at, I did an ASTEP program too, and that was one of the prerequisites. They could do like a medical assistant or EMT. And I think it gives you such a good base knowledge of so many different things, and you, particularly working in EMS, you don't panic if there's a seizure or things like that. Like I've literally seen techs run out of the room when someone has a seizure because it scared them. So that kind of prepares you for emergencies, because particularly now more than ever, you know, where you're likely to have an emergency in the sleep lab. But you know, that was it. It was, you know, it was on the job training, of course. So you get in there and you know, they're saying, okay, you just do this, you measure this. And, you know, so you're trying to remember all of these things. And then the first 2 days you're like, I've made a terrible mistake. I've just made a terrible mistake. I don't see any of these things that they're saying I should see. I don't see a spindle. I don't see sideways Christmas trees for the eyes. So by like day 3, it finally clicks in.
I just wanted to make another $1 an hour. That's what got me into sleep.
I love the reference of the sideways Christmas trees. I haven't heard that in a long time.
Well, yeah, that's what they kept saying. And I was like, I don't see them. I don't see those Christmas trees. So then finally it kind of clicked in about day 3. And then, you know, at that point, like by day 4, the next week, you're working by yourself. So it's kind of scary, but I mean, that is how it worked back then. You know, you got about, if you were lucky, you got about a week's training with somebody and then you were out working on your own. So you figured out a lot of things, you know, on your own. And as you went, there's a lot of things you haven't even heard of at that point. I think in my first couple of months working by myself, and I was at a lab by myself, somebody had run behavioral disorder and I had no idea what that was. And it was the freakiest thing I'd ever seen. And I'm in talking to the patient. They're kind of talking to me. I'm running back in the tech room and I'm like, they're asleep. So, you know, so interesting things happen nowadays. I'm glad we have a little bit better training programs and, you know, college, people can get some education and get in, so you're a little more prepared for those things and not learning them because it happened to you while you were running a sleep study. But that was it. It's very similar to everybody else. Yep.
Well, Kimi, you and I used to work together, and I know that you, and I would probably put the number of accreditations that you have been through and been a part of, you probably have done that more than anybody in the industry. And that's really, you know, part of what we wanted to really sort of dive into today is the fact that you're on the AASM's Accreditation Committee. You've been a part of that for some time now, and and really, can you tell us how that sort of happened, and what that committee, what your responsibilities are, and really maybe even then just walk us through what an accreditation process looks like.
Sure. I mean, also with accreditation, it's just kind of something I accidentally fell into and started doing more and more of them. And then all of a sudden I'm doing, 20, 30 a year. And so I've probably done way more than 300 at this point, in the last 20 years. I've gotten to know the site visitors, they know me, and that always works out well when you have some connection there and they know, what to expect. But so I started out, and this is at Medbridge, Robert. So I started out doing a lot of accreditations there, and that was just part of my job, but it ended up being a lot of my job. Instead of kind of having managers try to work in there and do it, once every 5 years, it really was helpful to have the same person doing it over and over again. And then you don't have this loss of, what happened in the last 5 years that I need to change. So I started doing all those accreditations. And then at some point, I think it was actually John Mathias said, he goes, you should volunteer for that accreditation committee. And I was like, oh boy, one more thing I got to do. And so at that point, it was all doctors on the committee. And I thought, well, I'll put in my, you apply and, send your resume and things like that and the reason for that really is they want a nice mix on these committees. So there's lots and lots of committees, but they don't want everybody to be from the same place and same background. They want to really have different opinions from all over the country, because like the way sleep operates in California is going to be very different than it operates in Florida. So they want a nice mix, and then like peds and things like that. So get a little mix of different specialists on the committee too. So that's kind of the reason for that. But so I ended up getting on the committee. So I was only SleepTech, but I think I brought probably two reasons. You bring kind of an interesting perspective as a tech, or a different perspective, but also just how many accreditations I was doing. I got an insight into physician-owned practice, IDTFs, and hospital-based practice all over the country. So that was kind of had information that worked well with the accreditation committee, because I did have kind of some insight in a lot of different places and scenarios. So you volunteer for the committee, and there are many committees, but the accreditation is one that I had a special interest in. And I think I got on as a committee member in 2017, and it's either 2 or 3 year commitments that you do. And then I ended up becoming the vice chair about 2 years ago. So with the committees, we meet once a month, but if you're a chair or vice chair, you meet twice a month. So what you would do is meet the week before and you discuss everything. You've got your accreditation liaisons. The staff at the AASM is awesome. They put everything together, and help you with an agenda, and we kind of hash out what we need to talk about. With the accreditation committee, for example, we might have assignments. So if there's a center issue, maybe somebody's got a proviso that they're writing a letter about and saying we can't meet this and here's why, and we think we should get an exemption or something like that. So we go over center issues is one of the things. We approve accreditation programs. We have a lot of special projects that we get sometimes. We had a special project a couple of years ago. It took almost a year to get through that project. And then standards and things like that. So those would be other kind of special projects. You work on the accreditation standards. So that's about once a month. You get your information that we're going to review on the committee about that week, and then we go through it. It's funny that sometimes what you think everybody's going to agree on, you're reading the agenda and it's like, oh, that's going to be a slam dunk. It'll take 5 minutes. That'll be the one that takes 45 minutes to hash through. Everybody's got a different opinion on, because you have to make decisions sometimes, whether that be for a standard or something upcoming with the accreditation, like a process, or like a center issue. And so it is already rules. Sometimes everybody's great, it's interesting to see that, but we have a lot of really good discussions, because even my mind gets changed. I may go in thinking one thing, and then you hear some opinions from people from different, parts of the country or different experiences. But the accreditation process, it's been pretty much the same for a long time. I think everybody gets kind of bogged down in the stress of it, but it shouldn't be that way. The ASM is there to help you. They want to see you get accredited. So I think people have a tendency to think of an accreditation as, what can we find wrong with your center that we're gonna, get you on? But that is not the way it goes. They're really there to help. They're really nice people. If you have any questions at all, you just call. You just call up their accreditation liaisons, and they are there to help you and explain anything you need. But the accreditation process starts with an application. So it's an online application now. I remember back in the day, you used to send, I can't remember, it was 2 or 3, like it couldn't be more than an inch thick paper application, and you would send more, I forget, I think it was maybe 2, more than one copy. I think one maybe going to the site visitor, one going, that was at the AASM. So it's come a long way. And now you just scan all your stuff and attach it in there. So the application, I think people again get overwhelmed at that, but it tells you exactly what it wants. You put it in, everything's listed. You add your stuff, and you add your documentation. It tells you exactly what it wants in there. So you just keep attaching everything it's asking for. It's going to tell you if something isn't in there. So what would happen
is I remember taping Polaroids into my accreditation application. That was a long time ago.
Yeah. Now you just have to do a floor plan. Unless you move or something, then you might have to have some pictures.
I remember putting in the dividers and all that. It was
yeah.
It was huge. It was like a big binder, and it was huge, but it couldn't be more than an inch thick. I guess people got a little overzealous at some point. Somebody sent them an encyclopedia, and then we got a height measurement on that. But once you submit your application, it will get reviewed. They do have some things now. It's like expedited accreditation. So if you were maybe in a hurry, maybe your state, this is probably less now, but if your state had an LCD change and you need to get accredited very quickly, if you do the expedited accreditation, I think they say they'll get it reviewed in about 2 weeks, where normally it might be like 4 to 6 weeks for an application review. So even then, they go through the application review, and if anything, they call them issues, which I kind of wish they'd call them maybe a query or something like that. Issues doesn't sound nice. But if you were to get any issue, then you'd get an email that say, hey, you've got a couple issues. You log back into your application. They are very clearly stated. Maybe it's a policy that needs to have some more information on it. Maybe you accidentally attach somebody else's CPR card to another tech or something like that. So it'll tell you exactly what they're looking for you to resolve those issues. So the purpose of that is that from the application, they really want to have everything they could possibly need. They want to make sure that essentially, if you're getting through the application portion, you really should not have any issue with the site visit, because they're looking for all the things they would need to know that your program is meeting all the standards. And that's really what it's about. Are you meeting all the standards, taking care of the patients and that kind of thing? Do you have the right appropriate staff and that sort of thing? And that's all in the application. So you submit that. So it used to be that you would get your site visit before you would become accredited, but that switched around a little bit, and probably because of volume, and it just makes it a little bit faster, is you get accredited from your application, and then they'll come visit your site within the next year, sometime within the next year. Now with COVID, it's a little backed up. We've had some a little bit longer. I see the list, I won't say, but I see the list of how many are pending. And I'm like, oof, we got backed up. Everything got a little backed up during COVID, because everything was just shut down. And then now they used to always come on site, but with COVID, became, like everybody else had to figure out a way to do it. We were doing, the AASM adopted some Zoom site visits, so some virtual site visits. They are, as of July, they are doing in-persons again, but it's still a little bit of a mix. So I think doing some of the virtuals on reaccreditations and things might help, get that backlog down too. But really the virtual is the exact same thing if you were in person, but all you need is make sure one person is in the lab, because they're going to take the camera around and show the actual lab, look at the bedrooms, look at the space between the, the wall and the bed and the equipment and all that kind of stuff, where you clean things. So that's, when you get your site visit date, you'll get an email for your site visit date. And then it's usually, they give you, it's probably at least 45 days out, if not a little bit more, because the medical director is going to have to be there for the entire site visit. So they will have to block their day. And so the ASM is very cognizant that, that's not an easy thing to do for a physician, a practicing physician these days. So you do have to kind of block your day. So you need to be there the whole time. And that's when they're basically just verifying everything you put in the application. So they're just verifying that what you sent is what's happening at your center. And then a big part of that day would also be reviewing case samples. or case studies of patients that the medical director has seen. And that's really just to make sure that the patients, there's actual follow-up with those patients. So that's a big part of the ASM's kind of mission and values, is that sleep patients are being taken care of and followed appropriately. So in looking at those case samples, it's very easy to see pretty quickly, that those patients are being followed appropriately and cared for appropriately. Where you'd run into a problem if nobody's seeing those patients and follow up. But that kind of usually gets hashed out before it ever starts, because that is part of the standards, that you do have to have follow up for the patients, for your sleep patients, offer a follow up.
Kenny, I know that there are some sleep diagnostic providers that, they're more of an e-commerce model where they don't necessarily bill insurance and that sort of thing. I don't know that they regularly seek accreditation either. Maybe they do, but do you see any of those types of diagnostic services get AASM accredited?
I don't know about e-commerce. I don't think so. I haven't seen any of those. For sure, there are those that get accredited that don't have to. I mean, obviously, one of the big reasons to get accredited is so you can bill insurances and things like that. But not all states require that. So you do see many in states who don't have to have it. They just want to have it to be able to say we're meeting the gold standard. That so patients can feel comfortable. But I haven't seen that yet.
And Kimi, I know that one of the questions that we had posed and as we were, looking at topics or having topics sent to us from, some of the sleep techs in the field was related to 3-to-1 care and sort of what the ASM stance on that is. And, not to necessarily try to be controversial, but just to sort of help, I guess, the field and others understand sort of what's going to happen if you're in a 3-bed sleep center and you're going through your first ASM accreditation.
Okay, and I won't speak for the ASM on this, but the language was in there for about 5 minutes, and so it ended up getting taken back out, and it says 2-to-1 under usual circumstances. So that is the volume now, and I think the biggest concern on that is if you actually put that in writing and in a standard, it might start to affect payers and things like that. Well, if you can do 3. For the accredited sites, so you can absolutely have 3-bed labs and run 3-to-1s. What you need is a policy on how and when you're going to do that. So what's important is you can work within the confines of those standards, but you might want to think about, okay, we're going to have a policy that says we're only going to do certain types of patients. We're not going to have special needs patients on those nights, and things of that nature, so you're not overwhelming the tech. The other thing might be like an emergency backup policy where you can call somebody if you need it. If you're in a hospital environment, that might be a little less, or it might be a little bit easier to get somebody up if you needed help. But if you're at an IDTF, let's say, maybe there's some kind of emergency backup policy where if you get overwhelmed or if you get sick, which honestly, that could happen in a 2-bed lab. The tech could get sick and now you've got 2 patients. The only difference is you've got now 3. But so that was one thing that was suggested by a site visitor, was to have kind of emergency backup policy, which I made, which of course did. But when you think about it, particularly with an IDTF, it doesn't matter if you have 1 or 3 patients. If something bad happens to the tech or a patient, the same thing is going to apply. So you can do it. You just want to make sure you have supporting policies on when and how you're going to manage that.
Hey, Kimi, thank you so much for that. That was actually very interesting. And I know, like Robert said, it's often very controversial. So that was definitely a good explanation. But we're out of time, and we can't thank you enough for joining us on the podcast. And we want to thank all our listeners and viewers out there for joining us. And with that, we're going to close today. Lights on.